Every case leaves a trace, a name, a date, a question that was never answered. This is Silent Shadows. On a summer evening in 1919, a farmer traveling along a quiet lane near Little Stretton, Leicestershire, noticed a young woman lying beside a bicycle. At first, the scene looked like a tragic accident. Perhaps she had lost control, struck the road, and suffered a fatal injury. But the truth was far more troubling. The woman was Annabella Wright, and somewhere along that lonely stretch of road, someone had fired a single fatal shot. Bella, as she was known, was 21 years old. She lived with her family in Staunton, a village a few miles southeast of Leicester, and worked at a factory. Her life was not one that would usually attract newspaper attention. She went to work, helped at home, visited relatives, and used her bicycle to travel between the small villages scattered across the countryside. Then, on the 5th of July, 1919, an ordinary afternoon journey became the beginning of a mystery. To understand the case, it helps to picture the setting. This was rural Leicestershire just after the First World War. Motor traffic was still relatively light, and bicycles were essential transportation for many working people. The roads between villages could feel isolated, bordered by fields, hedges, and long stretches where a traveler might see no one for several minutes. Encounters stood out. A stranger on a distinctive bicycle could be remembered, especially in a place where local people recognized one another. That Saturday afternoon, Bella left her home on her bicycle. She planned to visit relatives in Galby, a nearby village. There was nothing secretive about the trip and no sign that she expected danger. She was dressed for an ordinary ride through the countryside. At some point along the way, however, she encountered a man riding a green bicycle. Witnesses would later remember the color because it was unusual enough to catch their attention. The man began traveling with Bella. Exactly how they met and what passed between them remains uncertain. They may have exchanged only a few words before continuing in the same direction. He may have introduced himself, offered assistance, or simply fallen into pace beside her. What matters is that they were seen together more than once. Those sightings would become the central thread in the investigation, connecting Bella's final movements to a cyclist whose identity was initially unknown. When Bella reached Galby, the man was still nearby. Accounts from people who saw them suggested that his presence was not entirely welcome, although the precise nature of their interaction was disputed later. Bella visited her relatives while the cyclist remained in the area. He did not appear to be a member of the family or someone they recognized. In a small community, that unfamiliar face combined with the green bicycle was memorable. After Bella left, the man was seen traveling with her again. Now here's where the timeline becomes especially important. Bella began riding back towards Staunton in the evening. Her route took her along Gartree Road and through the countryside near Little Stretton. The green bicycle rider was seen in the same general area. But there were no confirmed witnesses to the final moments. At some point, Bella and the man were no longer simply two cyclists on a public road. Something happened in the narrow, unwatched space between one sighting and the discovery of her body. Later that evening, a farmer came upon Bella lying near the road beside her bicycle. The position of her body and the apparent lack of any obvious weapon initially suggested a cycling accident. She might have fallen and struck her head. Her bicycle was there, adding to that impression, yet certain details did not fit comfortably. There was blood around her face, and the injury seemed difficult to explain as the result of a simple fall on a country lane. Bella was dead by the time help arrived. Her identity was established, and the news reached her family. What had begun as a routine visit now ended with her body on the roadside, only a short distance from home, for those who knew her. There was no clear explanation. She had not set out to meet anyone, at least as far as they understood. She had not spoken of threats. The only immediate lead was the unidentified man on the green bicycle. The first assumption of an accident did not survive closer medical examination. A small wound was discovered, and it became clear that Bella had been shot. One bullet had caused her death. The apparent simplicity of the scene was suddenly deceptive. Her bicycle had not merely carried her to the place where she fell. It was now lying beside the victim of a killing, on a road with no known eyewitness to the shot itself. That finding changed everything. Police now had to reconstruct the movements of Bella and every person seen near her. They spoke with relatives, residents, farmers, and travelers. Again and again, descriptions returned to the same figure, a man accompanying Bella on a green bicycle. Bicycle was not just a passing detail. Its unusual appearance gave investigators something tangible to search for, even though they still had to identify the rider and prove what, if anything, he had done. Witness testimony can be powerful, but it is rarely perfect. People had seen the cyclist from different distances and for different lengths of time. Their recollections were gathered after they knew a young woman had been killed. Some remembered his clothing, his build, or his face. Others focused on the bicycle. Together, the accounts created a general picture, but not an immediate identification. The mysterious rider seemed close enough to touch, yet for months he remained beyond the reach of the investigation. So let's back up a second. In 1919, tracing a bicycle was nothing like tracing a registered motor vehicle today. There was no simple national database showing every owner. Police relied on manufacturers, dealers, repairs, sales records, and public appeals. A bicycle could also be repainted, altered, dismantled, or abandoned. If the rider wanted to distance himself from that green machine, he had several ways to do it. And that, investigators would eventually believe, was exactly what happened. The case lingered without a decisive breakthrough. Bella's family had buried her, but the question of who fired the shot remained unanswered. Local suspicion naturally centered on the unknown cyclist. Although being seen with Bella did not by itself prove murder, he might have left her before the shooting. Another person might have approached after they separated. Investigators needed more than a description. They needed a name, physical evidence, and some way to connect the two. Months later, parts of a green bicycle were recovered from a canal. The machine had been taken apart before it was thrown into the water. Other items associated with the same discovery included a revolver holster and ammunition. The condition and location of the objects suggested deliberate disposal rather than an accidental loss. Someone had apparently wanted them gone. For police, the canal evidence transformed the investigation. The green bicycle was no longer merely something witnesses remembered. Portions of it could now be examined and traced. The trail led to Ronald Leight, a former soldier who had served during the war. He had also worked in technical and teaching roles. Most importantly, investigators concluded that he had owned the distinctive bicycle. Leight was no random name pulled from rumor. The recovered parts, the history of the bicycle, and the witness descriptions brought police directly to him. He now had to explain why property linked to him had been dismantled and hidden in water after Bella's death. Leight initially resisted the suggestion that he was the cyclist seen with Bella. As the evidence developed, however, his position changed. He eventually admitted that he had encountered her and accompanied her for part of the journey. He also admitted disposing of the bicycle and other items recovered from the canal. Those admissions placed him far closer to the case than he had first acknowledged, but he continued to deny the central accusation. He said he had not killed Bella Wright. According to Light's account, he and Bella separated before she died. If that was true, then his presence with her could be explained without making him the gunman. His disposal of the bicycle and equipment looked deeply suspicious, but Light argued that suspicious behavior was not the same as murder. A person who fears being blamed may conceal evidence even if innocent of the crime itself. That explanation would eventually become essential to the defense case. The prosecution, meanwhile, faced a difficult problem. No witness had seen Light fire a weapon. No one had testified to seeing the exact moment Bella was shot. The firearm that killed her was not conclusively produced as the murder weapon. The canal items showed that Light had discarded objects that might connect him to the investigation, but they did not recreate the shooting. The case depended on a chain of circumstances, and every link in that chain would have to survive challenge. There were also questions about motive. Why would Light kill a young woman he had apparently met by chance? The prosecution could suggest an unwanted approach, an argument, or some other confrontation on the road, but suggestion is not evidence. Bella could no longer describe the encounter. No surviving witness had heard a decisive threat or seen a struggle. Without a clear motive, jurors would have to decide whether Light's lies and acts of concealment were enough to establish guilt beyond reasonable doubt. Light was charged and brought to trial in June of 1920. By then, the case had attracted wide public attention. The phrase green bicycle had become inseparable from Bella's death. In court, witnesses were asked to identify the man they had seen riding with her. Investigators explained the recovery and tracing of the bicycle parts. The prosecution built its argument piece by piece, inviting the jury to see Light's conduct as the behavior of someone trying to erase his connection to a killing. The defense was led by the celebrated barrister Edward Marshall Hall, known for his ability to expose uncertainty in difficult criminal cases. He did not need to prove who killed Bella. He needed only to show that the prosecution had not proved it was Light. That distinction is crucial. The defense could accept that Light had behaved dishonestly, even foolishly, while still arguing that his dishonesty came from fear and self-preservation rather than guilt for murder. Witness identification came under particular scrutiny. How long had each person seen the cyclist? What was the Light like? How certain were they after so many months? Had press coverage or later information influenced their memories? These questions did not necessarily mean the witnesses were mistaken, but a criminal trial requires more than a broadly plausible story. The defense pressed the gaps between seeing Light with Bella earlier and proving he remained with her when the fatal shot was fired. The physical evidence had limits as well. The recovered holster and ammunition showed access to equipment associated with a firearm. But access was not the same as proof of use. The bicycle connected Light to the journey and to his later concealment, yet it could not show what happened at the roadside. Even the act of throwing the items into the canal could support two interpretations: consciousness of guilt or panic after realizing that police were searching for Bella's mysterious companion. And then there was Light himself. by admitting part of the story only after evidence confronted him. He had damaged his credibility. An innocent witness would ordinarily be expected to come forward, especially after learning that the woman he had accompanied was dead. Instead, Leight had hidden his bicycle and denied his connection. Those facts were hard to ignore. Still, the jury had to consider whether they proved murder specifically, rather than fear of scandal, prosecution, or exposure for other reasons. After hearing the evidence and arguments, the jury returned its verdict. Ronald Leight was found not guilty. In legal terms, he left the courtroom acquitted of Bella Wright's murder. The verdict did not declare that every part of his story was true. It meant the prosecution had not established his guilt to the required standard. There had been no direct witness to the shooting, no conclusive murder weapon, and no unbroken evidential bridge between the cyclist's journey and Bella's final moments. The acquittal also meant Leight could not simply be tried again because suspicion remained. The case against him had been tested before a jury and had failed. Police never brought another person to trial for Bella's death, so the investigation ended in an uncomfortable position. The man seen with her had been identified. He had admitted disposing of remarkable evidence. Yet the legal process had not proved that he fired the shot, and no alternative killer was ever established. Over the years, the green bicycle case has often been discussed as if it must have a simple answer. Light's behavior appears incriminating, and many people have concluded that he escaped conviction because the evidence was incomplete. Others point out that this is precisely why the burden of proof matters. A chain of suspicion can feel persuasive while still leaving room for another sequence of events. Bella may have separated from Leight and encountered someone else. Improbable is not the same as impossible. There are also facts we may never recover. We do not know exactly what Bella thought of the cyclist. We do not know the full conversation between them where they separated if Light's account was true or why she was shot with a single bullet. We cannot know whether the killer planned violence or acted in a sudden moment. The rural road preserved no reliable answer. By the time suspicion focused sharply on Leight, months had passed and crucial evidence may already have disappeared. What remains certain is much smaller and much sadder. Bella Wright left home to visit relatives on the 5th of July, 1919. She was seen traveling with a man on a green bicycle. That evening she was found dead beside her own bicycle near Little Stretton. Ronald Leight admitted being the cyclist and admitted disposing of evidence, but a jury acquitted him. No one else was tried. More than a century later, Bella's final journey remains unresolved, suspended between powerful suspicion and proof that never arrived. If this case stayed with you, there are others waiting. Subscribe to Silent Shadows and walk with us into the next one.